Greetings, Stoutlaws. You may recall a player from Mordhau called Ronguat. He organised several events flawlessly and was generally the last hope for Mordhau's comp scene, as the devs themselves didn't run any events or contribute to prize pools, whilst other organisers promised them but failed to pay out. I'm still personally owed $1,000 by Venetus, and many other players are missing their prize money too. Unfortunately, he left the scene 2 years ago, until earlier this year when he returned to announce that he was arranging a Melee meetup, which was not only a gathering of American players, but also the first and probably last Mordhau LAN party. Despite being already monumental, this event had a secret, ulterior motive, the big reveal that he and a small team were working on a new first-person Melee title called Mobius. Now, I know it's getting confusing with all these upcoming Melee games. This isn't the game I'm working on, but it's such a historic event and next level reveal, I need to make sure it gets the attention it deserves. Here's the announcement at the end of the day with Ronguat, Wizardish and Wheeze on stage, who have all been working on the project. After this, the party went upstairs again to play the current alpha version of their game, which I'll include on screen.
So, we do have an announcement, which is part of the reason that we got you guys all here.
Not just for the company?
No, not just for the company.
Can you keep it down, bro?
Yeah, so we've been working on a project since early 2020, and it is a new first-person competitive Melee game.
Ooh.
So,
Spook! You're shook, man!
We're going to take maybe the next 30 minutes just to talk about what that is, what that looks like, and following this, you'll all get to play it now.
Oh! What? Dude, I love it here! Holy shit, man! Thank you.
Yeah,
I love Ryan, I love Watt.
I'll ask you guys to let us ramble on for maybe a couple minutes, and then you'll all get to play it. So, yeah. Yeah, so we are Ascend Games. Basically, I think a lot of us have experienced the sentiment of just how exciting and fun and interesting and compelling and competitive these kinds of games can be. But it sort of, for a while, has felt like there hasn't been a proper home for competitive play, right? Where people are trying to climb the ranks or play for prize pools in a really legitimate, serious environment. And so us and the rest of the Ascend Games team, some of whom are in the audience, some of whom are elsewhere, really wanted to try and provide that. So we started work on this project. It's 5v5, very much a focus on ranked competitive play, as well as like a tournament circuit, prize pools, leagues, all that 9 yards. And then the other half of that is community-created content and a focus on sort of like user-generated stuff. Along with that, the game will be completely free to play. So higher player counts, more interest than average, that sort of stuff. But yeah, I would say to talk a little bit about the gameplay, the two big things we wanted to focus on are consistency and meaningful decision making. So when you're playing the game, everything works how you expect it to, and there are lots of opportunities for you to make meaningful decisions about what you do next. So the game's combat, if you've played Mordhau, will feel quite familiar in some ways and quite different in other ways. Chambers are long gone. That's just a thing of the past.
Boy, can we give a round of applause for that? Get good!
Yeah, in defense of Mordhau, I think Chambers do make sense for a game where everybody's supposed to be good, but for a game where everybody's supposed to win and be skillful, it's just inflates the time. Anyway, nerd stuff. Point is, Chambers are gone. There's some new mechanics that have introduced themselves that I'm excited for you guys to try out. One is Perfect Parry, which is like a shorter and more skillful version of the parry that allows you to do some really crazy mix-ups out of it, like being able to morph feint or riposte, for example, and some really crazy stuff we're excited for you guys to play around with. But overall, there are 4 classes in the game. There's Frontliner, there's Backliner, there's Flanker, and there's Duelist. So each of those serve a very specific role. For the 5v5 game mode, there's no more skirmish, for better or worse, but we've moved to a continuous game mode that we call Deliverance, where there's a capture point in the middle that feels pretty similar to Hardpoint, but then once you capture it, an object spawns and you have to carry it to the enemy team's base. You can think of it almost like a cart push, except you're driving the cart, essentially, so you can go wherever you want, and there are different routes on some of the maps to facilitate that. We have a lot of cool plans for what to do with that core template and make it really interesting. But one of the things that was really important to me is I think 5v5 skirmish in Mordhau, with none of the bullshit, you don't have horses, you don't have archers, you don't have items, you don't have any of that stuff, is still a ton of fun, right? Like, the core gameplay really carries it, and so for our game, we're really doubling down on the core combat being pretty much everything that the game is about and balancing around that. So there's no items of any kind as of now. Every single weapon is balanced as a sort of side grade. So there are no weapons that are better or worse than each other. There's no more point system where you're choosing how to allocate stuff. It's just you pick a weapon, you pick a class, and you go. The weapons are class specific. So for example, you might be used to playing the Zweihander in a certain way, but Zweihander is only available in the flanker class in our game. And there are a lot of different other examples like that where the weapons are balanced around the class they're attached to rather than sort of being a neutral thing. I could talk on and on and on about the gameplay, but I'd rather you guys just play it, so I'm going to try and keep that to a minimum, and then we can ask. You guys can always ask questions later on. Yeah, I think the whole idea, again, is just I'm really grateful for the opportunities that the competitive community in first-person melee games like Mordhau have provided me up to this point. And so we really wanted to provide some opportunities in return, right? So with this project, we'll have the resources and the means to really explore what a competitive first-person melee title looks like. A couple of criticisms we've experienced along the way that I just wanted to briefly speak to is like, well, swing manipulation looks weird, and noobs are never going to care about it. And I think one of the things to double down on there is it's all about perspective from where I see it. Like, the people in this room understand what makes an interesting swing or whatever else, and if you see it, you're not like, ew, that looks gross. You're like, oh my god, that was sick, you know, and just sharing that culture with new players coming in and being like, this is what's cool, this isn't, whatever else, and you can set those expectations yourself. It's sort of like when people are like, well, how can you drag? I'm like, well, why can Mario jump so high, right? It's like, who cares? That's not the point. It's just make it fun, make it skillful, and then people will learn to appreciate that. Another one is like, oh, well, if you don't have a mechanic to deal with feints, then what? Is it just like everyone presses Q and it's 50-50? So long term for the game, we're really focused on making feints readable from a neutral stance, and then moving into feint placement being a way that you get value out of offense. And if you place a feint badly, every feint in the game is punishable on reaction. So if you see somebody feint and you read it and you wind up, you will always have initiative.
That's true
right
now. Even the current build, that's currently true.
That does a lot for just playing around different things and making it so it's not just feint spam. Eventually we want swing manipulation to be the primary way which you're scoring damage. Another key part to touch on is like in Mordhau, one of the big criticisms that I had with the game is just the two-hit to kill meta. There are a lot of times where if you make one mistake in a team fight, you're just dead, right? But there are other times where you make 17 mistakes and it takes you 5 minutes to die, right? There's sort of an imbalance there because there's a lot of defensive mechanics that don't relate around health. In our game, the hit to kill is increased on average, but the ease of landing hits is also significantly higher because it just feels good to beat the shit out of people, right? You just hit them with your sword and they die, right? That's what makes the game fun. So the hit to kill ranges from like 1 to 5 on average. So if you're a frontliner, it's like 3 to 5 hit to kill. If you're a flanker, it's like 1 to 3 sometimes, depending on if you get mess or stab 3 times or something. But yeah, so the whole game is balanced around competitive feedback. The last thing is, following this meetup, this is the first time we've ever spoken about this publicly, by the way. You guys are the very first to know. But we're going to be inviting all of you guys to basically become closed testers for the project, so you'll be able to play it pretty much openly moving forward. And that's going to be something where we're really counting on you guys to provide feedback and just criticisms and let us know what you want from the game. Right?
Dude, my brain is finally going to take place.
Yeah. A big part of that is, I know when I first wanted to sort of have an open alpha, I know one of the drawbacks of Mordhau taking the similar approach is you have all these players that practice the game for thousands of hours before it's even released, and you just let them into the wild, and then they end up just like tearing people apart, and it's like, oh, this isn't fun. Luckily, if you have a game that's based around ranked matchmaking, those players are just going to rise to the top and then fight each other. And in fact, instead of stomping the noobs, they'll set an example for them, right? So we can showcase those matches and focus on those players making really good plays. They set an example for the new players who can learn how to play the game off of watching high-ranked footage or whatever else. There's a lot of stuff we have planned that we will eventually get to. One is like every high-level ranked match that is played, you are able to rewatch a replay of it whenever you want, so you can watch certain people's POVs using certain weapons and be like, how does this person play? Whatever else. Another one is just having ranged matchmaking as it is, right, where you can separate different levels of skill and you can learn at your own pace, that sort of thing. We want to have a lot of resources to teach players how to play these games built into the game. A lot of games don't have the burden of teaching their players how to play, but I feel this genre is so new and so bizarre that it's too easy to look at it and go, that looks weird, and turn it off, right? If you don't have someone to say, this is how you play, right? This is what a parry does, this is how it functions, you know? And again, it was exceptionally important that you guys really like the game, so the combat is definitely it's very much the core of Mordhau, right? Where you're swinging at each other, you're dragging, you're excelling, you're parrying, it feels very familiar. But then you'll learn there's some really cool style in there. So one interesting example is, I mentioned earlier that if you perform a perfect parry and then riposte out of it, you can do a morph or feint. What that means is because ripostes are unflinchable, right? But you can now morph and feint them. Let's say somebody tries to hit to parry you, but you did a perfect parry riposte. You could like riposte feint them and then punish them for trying to hit to parry you. And there's some really cool high-level interactions that come out with that. It'll take a lot of hands-on to really get in with all that. But yeah, the big thing is just a really big focus on competitive depth, clutch plays, really hype stuff. Raising the mechanical skill ceiling a little bit, raising everything, and then the other half obviously being releasing this combat system on a free-to-play game with a really powerful set of toolkits where people can make their own stuff so that we have all sorts of content into the future.
Fully planned SDK on release.
Yes, on release.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's give a round
Not
of
soon,
applause.
yeah, not soon.
Oh, okay.
The name of the game is Mobius. That's what the game is called. The visual style of it is it's a medieval foundation, but then there are some things that quickly become a little unnatural and surreal. And you're going to see that in a lot of different cool ways over time.
Medieval Inception.
We have another guy, his name is Manny. He's an animator that works on our projects, and he's done all the animations up to this point. He's not here right now, but to talk about his pedigree a little bit, he worked on Max Payne 3, he worked on Red Dead Redemption 2, he worked on How to Train Your Dragon, he worked on Shrek. He's been around the block.
Base Shrek.
Like the movie? What?
Yeah,
I
so
said games!
yeah, he's very talented.
Shrek.
And we're really excited to see what really pretty animations look like in a game like this. Because I think first-person melee is a genre, and by that I mean like Shiver Medieval Warfare, Mordhau. We've always felt that the animations were readable, but they weren't really like super detailed. You know, I think of a game like maybe For Honor, for example, where there's a lot of emotion and pizzazz behind everything that's happening, and we really want to see what that looks like when combined with what you expect out of a readable feint or like a sick drag or stuff like that. How do you blend those two things together? It's been a challenge for us to explore what that looks like, and there's been a lot of failures and redos along the way of, okay, that didn't really look how we thought it would, whatever else. But you know, failure way to success, right? So as of right now, despite the fact that Manny is so exceptionally talented, he's been held back by our inability to figure out what we want. And so the animations are still not quite where they'll eventually be, but that's not his fault, honestly. He's a phenomenal animator, and he's done a wonderful job on the project.
Twitch chat also wants to know when's the Kickstarter going to be available.
So that's actually a really good point. One thing that is unique about this project right off the bat is it's free to play. So asking the people who this game is being made for to fund it when it's going to be free anyway kind of feels shitty. We're not going to do that. We are pursuing private investment entirely, and that's going to be the avenue we take. So we're not going to be asking any of you to give us $50. That's not going to happen.
Can we still give you it?
Well,
Rio, stop kissing your ass, bro.
okay, we haven't gotten that far, but I guess we'll talk about it at some point. I'm not going to say a hard no, but I really don't want to promote the culture of it's your responsibility to make sure this game gets made. We want your advice, we don't want your money.
Let's just go play, dude.
Yeah.
Wait, one thing, man.
Aiden? Sure.
Yo, can we give like a huge shout out for like fucking Ronguat, his like staff? I don't want to be rude if I'm saying that, bro, but we're
That's his
fucking
mom.
here. Way more down to announce the game, man. This is fucking crazy, man. Let's go! Let's fucking go!
Hell yeah. Let's play this game.